Wow, this is amazing. I am overwhelmed with gratitude that so many of you are here, and thank you guys. This week is always a tremendous week for doTERRA and for those of us that use essential oils, and for you to take time out of that week to come to this event and to fill this room. I can't quite see, but it looks like we're almost full, and I appreciate you guys for being here today and taking a chance on those of us who put this little show together. So I want to start with that. And if it's okay with you guys, I'd like to tell you a story to start us off. Is that okay? Okay, perfect. And thank you to my wife for starting it off. I figured you guys needed a little beauty to get it going before I brought my ugly mug out here. So I want to talk to you guys and tell you a little story real quick. And it starts in December of 1977. That was the day that everything in my life changed. And that was the day that I lost my mother. It was a typical Sunday. She was at a bar with some friends. Turned into an argument, and the end result of that was that she was dead. The person who killed her was never charged, never did any time, and miraculously, nobody there saw anything. So, a couple of years go by, my parents and my maternal grandparents were in a long legal battle, and it was decided that I would live with my father and that my mother's family was forbidden to see me until I was 18 years old. So in September of 1980, my adoptive mother adopted me, and her name replaced my birth mother's name on my birth certificate, essentially erasing her from my life. And I was no longer allowed to see anyone in that side of the family. And so, almost overnight, half of my family was gone. My adoptive mother had been my dad's mistress when he was married to my mom. So you can imagine how tense and interesting those dynamics were, right? So in 1985, I was removed from my home with my dad and my adoptive mother, and I was sent to live at a children's institution for abused and neglected kids. My family history comes from the clan McCoy. We're of Scottish descent. We're gallows glasses. My family was mercenaries, right? Our family motto is Manu Forti, which means with a strong hand. My father knew what that meant. So did his dad, and unfortunately, at times, so do I. So I went to live at Jude Ranch for children in Boulder City, Nevada. I lived there for 4 years. And while there, I learned how to become less angry, a better child, I suppose. I learned tools to become a better fit for my household family that I would one day go back and live with. And my father at that time, he was going to learn how to be less aggressive, how to use his words, as we say now, instead of his hands. Unfortunately, while I was at St. Jude Ranch, and there were many positive things that happened, I was also sexually assaulted. And that's something I've never shared publicly. Men aren't victims, right? We don't have those things happen to us. So I didn't tell anybody, and luckily my roommate, who was the perpetrator, was a high school boy. I was 11 or 12 at the time. He was a wrestler, so it was easy for him to take advantage. He was transferred out, and he went to live somewhere else. But you can imagine how difficult it is at 11 and 12 years old to be put into a children's facility with 100, 150 other boys and girls who were born abused or born drug addicts, lived in families where they were neglected. Some of these kids went into CPS. Some of them came from the juvenile detention center because their parents weren't coming to get them, and they had served their time. So that was what that looked like, right? But I spent that time, and I learned how to behave. I went to counseling. I did all the things that I was told I needed to do to go back home and be with my family. So in 1988, I went back home to be with my family, my dad and my adoptive mother, and 6 weeks later, they were separated, and my dad was living out of his 1974 GMC Jimmy. And after a short period, he found an apartment in a part of Las Vegas called Naked City. gunshots every night, drug deals on the corner. I'd go over there and we'd have to kind of dodge the prostitutes to get to the apartment. And was exposed to things that 16, 17-year-old kids shouldn't be exposed to necessarily. So I had resolved at that point that all the work I had done was for naught, and that I would just be like my father and his father before him and the Hatfield and McCoys, who we come from, right? Just, this was our life. It was full of chaos. It was full of drama. It was full of divorce, right? So at about 16 or 17, I gave up. That was it. I was done trying to do the work on myself because what good was it? And I went into a place where everything was everyone else's fault. My boss, my girlfriend, my dad. It was my dad's fault for a lot of years, okay? So we fast forward to adulthood, and I've definitely had what people would call failures. Failed relationships, failed jobs, failed careers, things like that. The reality is, though, is that I haven't failed because I've never given up. When I got married, I was not prepared to be a good husband. I was not prepared to be a good father. You've met my wife, who came out and started this little show off today, and I cannot put into words how important she is to me and that I'm still here because of her. I'm not just part of doTERRA because of her. It's quite possible that I'm alive because of her. My two oldest kids are here today also. I have 8 children. We had Riley, who's now 21. I was 22, 23. Carrie was 19. Reagan came 2 years later. Both of them grew up in a violent household. It wasn't as violent as what I grew up in, but it certainly wasn't acceptable. That's hard for me to share. I have to take ownership of that. I have to own that, and that hurts a little to have to say that. I was not a good husband. I did not honor my wife the way I had promised. I did not show up for her the way I had promised. And for about the first 6 or 7 years of our marriage, it was, to say touch and go would be putting it lightly. It was really tricky. And well, I'll tell you that there were definitely times when she would lose sleep wondering if I was coming home, whether because I was driving drunk or I was out drinking or I wasn't living up to the standards of what a good husband is. Luckily, my children at the time were too young to see that. We did a really good job of keeping that between her and I. They don't remember their dad as someone who drinks alcohol. In 2005, I had what's called a quantum moment. Wayne Dyer talks about this in his movie, oddly enough called The SHiFT, which is not why we called this. But when I started to put together my presentation and I was going over and reflecting on things, I was like, oh, subconsciously, this guy definitely put that in my head. So in his film, he talks about the quantum moment, and it's that moment that shifts your life forever. And I remember that day like it was yesterday. I can tell you what I was wearing. I can tell you what time I made the decision to quit drinking. I can tell you the conversation I had with my boss when I left work. And I was a bartender. And I went to work, and I left, and I said, I can't be here today. He said, are you sick? And I said, no, I just can't be here. And it was everything I had to hold back the tears. I drove home, and I told Carrie, she's like, why are you home? Did you get fired? No, I didn't get fired. I said, but I am done drinking. Well, I've heard that before. Okay, I know you have. Since February 15th, 2005, I've not had a drink of alcohol. Thank you. I've spent the last, however many years that is, 14 or 15 years, making up for lost time. Most people like to renew their wedding vows on their 10th, 15th, 20th wedding anniversary. Carrie and I renewed ours on our 8th because I went to her and I asked her to marry me again. And I said, I need to recommit. Because I didn't feel like I deserved her, and I knew that I had a lot of work to do. So She didn't believe me at first. She was like, okay, yeah, whatever. And then a couple weeks go by, and she says, hey, what do you want to do for our wedding anniversary? And I said, I already told you, I want to renew our vows. And she was like, oh, you were serious? Yes, honey, I was serious. I needed that for me. So luckily, she agreed to marry me again. And now we have 8 children. And we have just this tremendous life. We've modeled for our kids this life of accountability. We've modeled for them what it means to be vulnerable. We've modeled for them what it means to take ownership of our stuff, right? And so I share this story with you, not because I want sympathy or that I'm looking for anyone to feel bad for me, because trust me, I'm the last person you need to have sympathy for. I share it with you because as I look out in this room, I promise you that the number of men in this room who have had pain, who have been victimized, who have possibly victimized others, or victimized yourself, is far, far greater than the number of men in this room who have not. So you are not alone. We all deal with these things that come up in our life. We all have things that we struggle with. We've been taught that it's better not to deal with it, to push it down. We've been taught that our job is to provide and to care for and not to be provided for or cared for ourselves. And I'm sorry, but that's bullshit, okay? You deserve to be able to deal with your stuff as much as anyone else, okay? It has taken me years to come to that realization. Luckily, my son, who probably felt the most abuse in our household, is here today. He's one of my best friends. We do Spartan races together. We work on projects together. He's one of our qualified legs on our team. He chose to work with us. That's a huge deal when your family decides that they want to be in this marriage, because that's what this is. Any of you building with your wives or doing doTERRA with your wives or considering it, this will be your second marriage, because it is every bit the same. Luckily, he recognizes something that I recognize also, which is what happened before doesn't matter. What matters is what happens now. Okay? I share my story with you so that you can recognize that you are the author of your story. You may not have had as much control of your story in those first 15, 18 years when you're under the thumb of your parents. Maybe it's not a thumb. Maybe you live in a very, very loving, embraced household. But those first 15, 18 years, when you're a child, you have some restrictions, right? But once you move out of your parents' house, it's all your fault. Okay? Once you turn 18, you wreck the car, you steal something, mom and dad aren't there to help you, right? You're the one that's going to get in trouble. And so I share my story with you to tell you that all of that stuff that caused me pain for years, while it may sound tragic, I don't view it as tragic. I view it as the things that brought me here today and the thing that taught me the lessons that it's taught me, so that I could hopefully impart some of that to you and share that with you. So I want you to start to examine your story. And I want you to recognize that everything is your fault. Okay? I want to invite you to choose different. If you're sitting in a place right now, somewhere between despair and misery, because you don't like your job, you don't like your relationship, you don't like where you're at in your life, you have the power to change that. Okay? When I first came to this realization, I was kind of scared, right? I couldn't blame my dad. I couldn't blame my boss. I couldn't blame my wife. I couldn't blame my kids. I couldn't blame my in-laws, who are also here, by the way, and have 3 qualified legs that are all men. So we are shifting this business model, okay? But I want you to take ownership of that. I want you to recognize the power that comes with being able to say, if my mess is my fault, the empowering thing about that is so then is the recovery. So then is the healing. My son's been able to forgive me and My wife has been able to forgive me, and my oldest daughter has been able to forgive me. Luckily, my younger 6, they don't have the same dad. It took much longer for me to forgive myself, right? My 3-year-old, I think she still got some of that, I can't remember. My 3-year-old climbs into my lap the other day, a couple weeks ago. I'm down in the office, I'm working, and she says, "Dad, you're the best daddy ever." Oh, it just melts your heart, right? I know, I see Leland here. Thank you for being here. I know he's got a bunch of kids. I'm sure most of you guys have kids. You know, when your kid climbs up into your lap and puts those little arms around you and just tells you you're the best, there's nothing better, right? So I told Reese, I said, "Hey, Reese, that's so sweet. I love you. That's so amazing." I said, "But, I'm the only dad you've ever had. Like, you don't know any different." Reagan, sitting next to us, says, without even looking up, "But I did." He knows what it's like to watch someone progress and transform and heal. And he recognizes that what matters most is what's happening now, okay? You guys all made a choice to be here today. And you've all made choices that have got you to where you're at today. So I'm going to ask you to take ownership and take responsibility for where you're at. And if you don't like it, take responsibility for changing it. I think that's the quote that was on my slide. It's a Dennis Waitley quote. It says there are mainly 2 main conditions in life: to accept things the way that they are, or to accept the responsibility for changing them. Okay? So if you don't like where you're at today, that's on you. The upside to that is, wherever you want to go, that's on you. And you can do it. Because if I can do it, anybody can do it. And I've been to some of these other trainings you're going to go to or you're going to see this week, and I promise you, if these guys can do it, we can do it. Okay? We've been down that road. I'm just saying. You guys have it within you, okay? Now, I want to warn you that this work that I'm asking you to do is hard. It requires trust, it requires vulnerability, and it requires accountability. So if those things scare you, then figure it out, because that's what it's going to take, okay? We like to say in our house that you have to lean in. Have any of you ever walked through a windstorm or been walking outside when it's really windy outside? Right? So when you're walking, if you stand straight up and just try to walk against that strong wind, what happens? You don't go anywhere, okay? And if you lean back and you kind of retreat, that wind will blow you over. The only way to move forward against resistance is to lean into it. So the faster you can recognize resistance and the faster that you can lean into it, the faster you're going to progress, and the faster you're going to heal, and the faster that abundance is going to come to you. Okay? It's not just about you. What I realized when I decided to get my act together was mostly that I didn't want to lose my wife or kids. And that was a real possibility. It was not just like, oh, I don't want to lose them. It was like, this might happen, like, at any moment. And I couldn't stand the thought of that. So I'd love to say that I got right for me, and that I love myself so much, and that I'm so important that I did it for me, but I would be lying. Now, absolutely, it's important that we take care of ourselves. But I changed for my kids, and I changed for my wife. And I made that effort for them. And I know that the ancestral healing, the generational healing that will come from that is going to be tremendous. Because I may have cracked this thing open, but I watch my son and I watch my daughter as adults, and my younger kids coming up who are free thinkers. They're smart, they're witty. They do not know what defeat means. Because we have a saying in our house: I don't lose. Either I win or I learn. And they live by that motto. And they know that even when they don't win, they've not lost, because they're learning and they're progressing and they're moving forward. And we may be old, but we can still change. Okay? We can still make that shift. So I'm going to ask you guys to make that choice, to choose different for yourself when you leave here. Okay? I'm going to ask you to take a hard look at where you're at and where you want to go. The rest of today, you're going to hear from amazing people, right? These 10, 11 men that are going to come on stage are going to rock your world. They're going to educate you. They're going to teach you. They're going to give you things Not everyone is going to ring your bell, but you're going to get from somebody something that when you leave here today, you'll be different. So I'm going to invite you to make the choice, to listen to them, to hear from them. We're not paying them. They're not going to sell you anything. They're here because they're on the same mission that I am. We want to empower men to make the changes in their life that will bring them and their future generations the abundance that they deserve. So I'm asking you to make that choice. And if you do, I promise you won't regret it. Thank you.